Salutations, respected viewers. In this video, I'm going to talk about President Trump's attitude and style and his relationship with his mob. Steven Crowder, he is someone who said that democracy is bad because it's mob rule. And it's instructive to note that one of the most personable and popular young Republican polemicists is a sworn enemy of democracy. That's Crowder. It's then notable that Trump is so close to the arch enemies of democracy in other countries, and Trump eggs on the baying mob at his rallies. This is ochlocracy, mob rule, the very thing that Mr. Crowder purports to despise. Well, one of the things that's so noticeable about Donald Trump is his brutal dishonesty. He should tell the truth and shame the devil. Just occasionally, he disgraces himself by letting the truth slip out, stating the real reason for firing James Comey or Jeff Sessions. And it's fascinating that he answers questions which have not been put to him in interviews. He sent his minions out, and they've fabricated reasons, and then he'll let the cat out of the bag, and he'll say what the true reason for his decision is, and it's not the one that was concocted by some of his underlings. So it shows how Trump lacks self-control. I note that he has told thousands of demonstrable lies in his time in office, told them on record. But then you think, can the devil speak true? And yes, just occasionally even Trump says something which is true. So it demonstrates yet again how he is emotionally incontinent. He reacts with ire when thwarted, often flying off the handle. That's mob-like behavior, but in an individual. Now, Trump's often characterized as fascist. I think he defies easy categorization. I could go through the list of criteria, and he doesn't satisfy every criterion to be a fascist, but he has a few tendencies in that direction. So I believe in not resorting to hyperbole. He's not going to commit genocide. I don't fear that kind of thing. What is distinctive about him is his sense of lèse-majesté. When somebody makes a mild, fair criticism of him, he can't take it. Fair comment enrages him. So he would like unenlightened despotism. His attitude would appear to be l'état, c'est moi. I hope it doesn't end in après moi, le déluge. Because he thinks that his powers ought to be untrammeled. And that's why he so often wants to issue these presidential orders to do things. And often they're ultra vires, things that he's not entitled to do. As though he could change birthright citizenship. As though he could deny people the right to seek asylum and stuff like that. So Donald J. Trump has got such an affinity for dictators. And the compliment is returned by a number of them. So why this weakness for so-called strong men, or, brutes? Well, these kindred spirits around the world, they also have egos that are very easily wounded. And Trump is very fragile, not tough at all in that sense, very thin-skinned. A snowflake. Again, it's richly ironic that many of his most blinkered supporters should excoriate Democrats and people who are further left for being too touchy. Now, often they're on the money. There is a snowflake generation. You can't say this or that in college. And of course, it's preposterous, it's distasteful. However, these same people who are these blind supporters of Donald Trump, they don't seem to observe the very same tendency in the man at the apex of their movement, Donald Trump. And his pride is injured by reason criticism. And I'm afraid that's par for the course if you're going to go into politics. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. You've got to expect it. And he brings it on himself with his outrageous behavior. Yet Trump then makes unreasoned criticism of others for their appearance and such like. So much of what he says is for effect, but I'll come on to more of that later. So, wanting to rule by decree. Perhaps that's why he really adores Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. And in North Korea, opinions are all scripted for the people. There are the slogans to chant. The bit worse than lock her up. They used to be, let's dismember the US imperialists, but that was decades ago. So that rallies in North Korea are coordinated. everything is stage managed, and that appeals very greatly to Donald Trump, who wanted a military parade to exalt himself. The whole thing about is feeding his egomania. And Trump seemed to have no sense of self-awareness, no sense of irony when he said, "Isn't it fantastic that North Korea praises Kim Jong-un to the skies?" Well, there's a reason for that, because of massive scale state terrorism and political prisoners being sent to slave labor camps. And Trump thinks this is wonderful. It's nauseating. And where is the Republican Party? You know, they've lost their courage not to be saying this is absolutely unacceptable. It's disgusting that he should do that he should be pouring praise on perhaps the most vicious tyrant of all. There's no free speech at all in North Korea, and Trump seems to think that's splendid. Trump does not attempt to conceal his admiration and enthusiasm for totalitarianism around the world. Perhaps he'd like to be president for life too, such as happened in many countries where Trump thinks there's a fantastic political system. I notice how Trump is highly labile, and I suppose mobs are like that in himself. The mobs are like that, and he's almost a mob in himself. He gets into a towering rage where he does not get his way. He's like a hungry baby, shrieking. In his speeches, he always has an angle. He's never vanilla, I could say that for him. Whatever else you say about him, he is not a dullard. He may be a dotant. I think the North Koreans were right on that one about a year ago. So Trump's speaking style, I think, is unique amongst American politicians right now. And he's thundering fire and brimstone like a preacher. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why many Christian fundamentalists go for him, because he reminds them of the ranting they might hear in their lunatic churches. Trump's often snarling, irate, but he's never, ever down in the mouth. The thing is, fury passes for bravery amongst much of the Republican faithful. And his haphazard policy making, I suppose, is often on the basis of anger about things that are going on in the Middle East, rather than dispassionate reflection. So he seems to just posit decisions rather than ground them in hard data. We'll look back to his background, being born in New York, son of a Scottish-American mother and a German-American father. He's one of the younger of several children, and is notably scapegrace youth, going to that military school, and he claims this gives him a very deep sympathy and understanding of the US military. So he's a lamentable educational failure. Just to look at his ungrammatical speaking style, his inability to converse to even a very rudimentary level in any other language. He's obviously got no head for figures, must be virtually innumerate to have had so many huge financial disasters. But he grew up with an enormous sense of entitlement, and he absorbed the racial prejudices which were quite common amongst whites at the time. Got the idea that bluster carries the day, that if you lie unblushingly enough, you'll get away with it. You can make people back down. And by and large, that's worked for him. So he had a harum-scarum business career with many foreclosures, and he was very close with the mob, by which I mean gangsters. So he thought he'd keep in with Fat Tony Salerno, a notorious mafioso, buying cement from him in the early 80s. Is it unlawful to purchase cement? No, of course not. But why purchase from this supplier rather than any other? Was it quality, price, what? I suspect because he reasoned it would be politique to remain on cordial terms with gangsters. So he's mobbed up. Think of RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, written by Trump's hack, Rudolph Giuliani. Oh, the irony. You know, RICO is written in an incredibly broad way, these legal catch-alls. I wonder if Trump would even fall under it. If you have almost any connection with a gangster organization, you could go to jail. So Trump adored these brutal hoodlums. And he was a sharpster himself, at best, in his business practices. And a federal investigation proved that Trump pursued racist housing policies, excluding African Americans just because that made him more money. So his conduct has always been ungentlemanly, to say the very least. They say a gentleman never tells on a lady. And in the 80s, when he's having his extramarital affair with Marla Maples, he would phone up New York tabloids and encourage them to print tales about it. You know, saying that Marla Maples said the best sex she ever had was with Donald Trump and things like that. just the sort of thing that a Bible-believing Christian should do. Continuously needing to talk up his own suggestions. It's unbecoming of a president to insult people in a scatological manner. Remember what he said about Megyn Kelly? She's bleeding from a whatever, spoken like a true gentleman, saying that his former friend Mika Brzezinski was bleeding from a facelift. I don't know if she had one. And then look at Melania. It's not as though she's never had work done. She can never crack a smile. She's incapable of displaying any emotion whatsoever. But I suppose that's her voice as well as her face. So she would appear to have a face made of formica. So Trump goes in for flagrant lying. That really is the core of his political philosophy. It's the Fifth Avenue principle, if I can coin a phrase, when he memorably said, "I could shoot somebody dead on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get off scot-free." And that has worked for him, for the most part, committing so many flagrant crimes and never having his collar felt. He's a fraudster hiding in plain sight. Think of that hoax university he had. Well, the word university was a misnomer. All hard sell for these worthless certificates and diplomas. Is he not at the very least vicariously liable for Trump University? He was in the promotional videos. So he's totally irresponsible. There was some British politician a couple hundred years ago who said, "Never explain, never apologise." And that's more or less is Trump's outlook. So he never fesses up. He never holds his hand up and say, "Yeah, it was me." He never mans up to accept responsibility. As John F. Kennedy said, defeat is an orphan. Remember the Bay of Pigs? After that fiasco, got to hand it to John F. Kennedy. He had the moral courage to be there on the beach, meeting the guys when they were released, and he carried the can for that. And that's what leadership is, and that's why Trump is unworthy of the name of leader. He's a brand name, and obviously the name is about rooking people who are gullible. And his name recognition helped propel him to the presidency. So he has this insatiable desire for publicity, and I suppose it has made him money. He's utterly shameless. He's a mountebank, a financial snake oil salesman, more like a property snake oil salesman, with his casinos. Now, Christian fundamentalists tend to be against wages, and there he is. And we know casinos are often controlled by the mob, linked to prostitution. It's an addiction, like drug addiction. Isn't that not exploiting the feeble-minded, the desperate, the hopeless? It's quite close to usury. And yet, these Christian fundamentalists will forgive him all, even though he's utterly unrepentant and he's remorseless in being vicious to others. So it reminds me of Nietzsche's old dictum, people believe in what is seen to be strongly believed in. And so Trump is never one to do things by half measures or to say things in measured language. And because he purports to utterly believe in what he's saying and doing, some people are conned by that. Now, George W. Bush quipped that he read one book whilst he was at Yale. Well, that is infinitely more books than Trump. He seems to have read nothing, not even the books published in his name. So that's why he's so staggeringly ignorant. But he is clever in having figured out some of the basics of American life, that politicians can be bought. Money to salve your conscience. So he was always crossing their palm with silver and getting what he wanted. Someone had very high moral standards. $10,000 was a high enough moral standard. Melania was a nude model. And yet these Christian evangelicals gave her a pass. Doesn't bother me if she was a nude model. I wouldn't mind if she's a pornographic actress. But it would bother these judgmental people very much. Yet when Michelle Obama wore a dress that revealed her arms, she was lambasted for it. Such Victorian prudery from Fox News and the like. These Puritans are so judgmental and censorious, and yet Trump consorts with hookers. And it's not even debatable that he did that, and yet they won't utter a word against him. So it's been a roller coaster ride of a presidency. Buckle up, because it might get even bumpier. There have been countless contradictions in what he's done, promises he's reneged on, and leaders he's fallen out with, fallen in love with. So his speeches are rodomontades. He'll hold forth vaingloriously, so much about it himself, working his audience up into fever pitch, yelling. Would have thought that screaming would put people off as unattractive, but no, this shrieking is seen as valiant, and raving about this and that, about one thought not connecting to the next, speaking ungrammatically. He's so unreasoning, but some people find this to be mightily impressive. So he has played masterfully on white anxiety, on this specious notion of white victimhood, and claiming that ethnic minorities are not remotely victims by comparison. So he whips his hearers up into a delirium of hatred, a bit like football hooligans that you'd see in European countries. I notice how this Trump, what would I call it, alliance, it seems to have negative cohesion. They're united about what they're against more than what they're for, rather than particular policies. So he is the Pied Piper, providing the mood music for racism. He enchants the ignorant, he gets them livid, and he's managed to turn that into a power structure so he can ride this tidal wave of fury and hatred. Foaming at the mouth, xenophobes adore him, and he's offering ethno-nationalism when the United States was supposed to be about civic nationalism, nothing to do with race, creed, or colour, or religion. So swivel-eyed loons, rabid with spite, they adore Donald Trump and his acerbic philippics against immigrants, legal and illegal. Then he's a braggart about all his billions, but he's not going to give a penny to the penurious. Now, it's notable the contrast between Trump's sharp tongue when he's spouting these venomous lines and his pen. It was not a poison pen, an acid tongue, but his books are actually quite reasonable in tone and not malicious. Well, they are devoid of acrimony because they weren't written by him. They're written by Tony Schwartz. So yet another fraud Trump committed. I know he says with Tony Schwartz on the cover, but it's not with, it's totally Tony Schwartz. So Trump will always be vilifying his opponents as liars, but look what a fraudster he is himself. I remember that puerile ad personam attack on Chris Christie about 3 years ago. He's stuffing pancakes in his mouth like this. Well, Trump is no stick insect himself, and those who live in glass houses should not throw stones. Even a child could tell you shouldn't insult fat people if you are corpulent yourself. Look in the mirror. So he monsters the FBI, he blackguards judges, he's always casting aspersion on their probity, and these are people of unimpeachable integrity. Well, not Kavanaugh, but they consider it beneath them to retort. It would be unbecoming. It would be infra dignitate, and Trump's got no dignity by comparison. He has no integrity, and look what he accuses of them. So you can see how blatantly he is striving to pervert the course of justice. He's obviously frightened what this investigation will find because he knows he's guilty. So he's attempting to defeat the ends of justice by appointing yes men, notably not yes women. And that's obvious if you can even see past your nose. He inveighs against those who gainsay him. Even experts on the economy say, no, actually, the statistic you cited is not accurate. He can't take it. So he wants not just deference, he wants absolute submission. He wants total canine loyalty. And he gets it from some of his acolytes. He wants the media to be a panting puppy about him. Well, he gets that from Fox News. And on Fox News, there's a lot of heavy breathing about Trump on Fox News. And Hannity has become more or less the impresario of Trump's team or Trump's movement. There are recriminations by so many former Trump staffers with their tell-all news, so many non-disclosure agreements that Trump's had them sign because he knows there's so much that's shameful that they could disclose. And Trump obviously demonizes the media when they publicize the myriad scandals which have taken place in his administration. And then he called for decorum in the Washington press corps. I thought, well, that takes the biscuit. Now I've heard it all. That has a certain moral authority from Trump calling for decorum. You set the tone as president. You are a role model for many people. So you've got to blame yourself. So he's telling these flagrant lies almost incessantly. And he'll blast it out when challenged. When asked to reconsider what he's just said, he will restate his claim in an even more forthright manner. Like on the caravan and the caravan figures. It was an oxymoron, unknown Middle Easterners. Well, if they're unknown, how do you know who they are, where they're from? I mean, it's almost autoparodic. A flagrant lie that was just so easy to demonstrate. But some of his willfully purblind supporters will fall for that one. It's beyond ludicrous. His claims just not credible, yet they're lapped up by his followers. He's not forthcoming with detail because he doesn't know any particulars, and he speaks when he's got almost nothing to say. So Trump, he's no shrinking violet, I think we can say that. He's never camera shy. He's always loved the limelight. Melania's quite different. She's a bit of a wallflower, a Martha figure. She's to be seen and not heard. She's got nothing to say. She's as vacuous as her husband's slogan, "Make America Great Again." Now, it was a good one to pick in the sense that it's easily memorable. Slogans usually are vapid, and it was easily turned into an acronym. It can be vaguely understood by even the dimmest person. Well, so that's just a little introduction to Trump and how he feeds the mob and how he connects with the mob and how he urges them to be monstrous.